My name is Martin Madert with the Witness to War Foundation. It's September 17, 2023, and we are in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Sitting with Mr. John Ware, W-E-A-R, who served in the Vietnam War in the United States Marine Corps with the 3rd Tank Battalion, Alpha Company. How are you doing today, John?
Good.
Glad to hear it. I appreciate you taking the time to join me today.
I'm honored.
My first question today is where are you from originally?
My dad was in the Air Force, and he was assigned to Frankfurt, Germany to get ready for the Berlin airlift. And I came over with my pregnant mother inside her and ended up being born in Germany. And since then, we lived in San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Norfolk, Virginia, Honolulu, Hawaii, Tokyo, Japan, Syracuse, New York, and ended up in Colorado Springs. And then that's where I went to high school and college. And I went to New Mexico Military Institute for my high school. And that kind of gave me an intro. Besides the fact that I wanted to be an Air Force officer, I also, because my dad, I also thought maybe I wanted to be an Army officer. And then, should I keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I went to the Colorado State College up in Greeley, and it really was a teacher's college, not a university at the time. And so I went 1 year, and my parents came up parents' weekend or whatever and said, "Look, you need to go to we're paying for your college. We need you to go to a real business school, like University of Denver, University of Colorado, a big business school, and not a teacher school." And so I negotiated with them. I said, "Look, maybe one more year, and then I'll be like a junior college, and then I'll go." And they said, "No, we want you to go." So the next day or two, I went down to the Army recruiter, and he was in a high school, and it was only one guy. It was a small town. We went one guy, and he was at a high school, recruiting. And I went to the Air Force recruiter, and he was at a high school recruiting. And I went into the Navy recruiter, and that guy had hair hanging down over his collar. And I'd been to military school for 3 years, and I knew that wasn't I think the Army calls it strack. And so I walked out. And here's this big Marine gunnery sergeant sitting there with these medals and stuff. And he says, "You man enough to be a Marine?" And I puffed out my little 135-pound chest and said, "Sign me up, Gunny." And that's how I got in the Marine Corps. And that was in 1966, mid-year. And I went on the 120-day delay program so that I was able to have a summer and had a really terrific girlfriend and had a really great time. And at the end of summer, it was just after Labor Day, went to boot camp. And because I had been in the military, I've been in military school, I knew how to spit shine shoes and make a rack and all that stuff. So that part of it wasn't hard at all. The physical was really, really, I'd wrestled in school and all that stuff, but the physical was really tough. And they had, we call it a sand pit all around our Quonset huts where we had to do, push-ups and squat thrusts. We'd go to the shower. After 4 days of not getting a shower, we'd go to the shower and get out of the shower and then get in the sand pit. That was the Marine Corps. And after that, I went to infantry training, and then I got to go home for Christmas because it was in between. And that was really nice. And then came back and went to tank school and went to 5th Tanks at Camp Pendleton. And the difference was many of my counterparts, my contemporaries, went to tank school and went right to Vietnam. And several of us were lucky enough to be able to go right to Camp Pendleton, where they were building up the 5th Marine Division and the 5th Tank Battalion. So I was there for almost a year, and I ended up becoming a corporal. So I was a staff NCO, an NCO. And one of the recruitment guys, one of the staff NCO recruit guys said, "Hey, you've had some college. Why don't you take these tests and maybe you can go to OCS?" So I took the tests, and I think out of 7 tests, I passed 4 or 5. And they said, "That's good enough." So I signed up for OCS and Officers Candidate School. And then I thought, wait a minute, I had a second thought. I said, I really should get some combat experience before becoming an officer. So I de-pledged, if you will. I deactivated the request for Officers Candidate School. And I ended up going to Vietnam. And that was in mid-January of 1968. And the Tet Offensive had just started to begin. It was just starting, if you will. I think I got there about the 20th of January, and it started 10 days later. And I was in a fairly relatively secure area, but it was about 15 miles south of the city of Hue. And one day, the first sergeant, and I was waiting to get assigned to a tank battalion. And the first sergeant said, pack your gear, you're going, go to the helipad. And I got down to the helipad, and this big double rotor CH-46 came down and landed, and it didn't even land on the ground. It just kind of hovered. And at the time, I didn't even remember there were two guys with us, but three of us jumped on the helicopter, and we were the only people on the helicopter besides the crew. And it lifted up, and it picked up a huge pallet of ammunition, and it started going, and it started flying. And I hate heights. I'm a tanker. I want to be on the ground. And and the helicopter, the load was swinging, so the helicopter was going like this, and I was way more worried about crashing the helicopter than I was going into combat for the first time. It didn't even enter my mind that I was going into combat. Plus the fact I'd already been in the Marines for a year and a half, and I was a corporal, and yada, yada, yada. So anyway, we landed, got off the helicopter, and as the helicopter was landing, across the river, the North Vietnamese were shooting at the helicopter and at the helipad. So all the Marines were on the other side of the river shooting back. Well, here I am, here's the shooters, and here's the bad guys. So they're shooting at us, and they're shooting at us, and it was, anyway, came around the corner, a machine gun was going, brrr. I said, stop, and he waited, and we ran across and found the tanks. And because I'd never been in country, I'd only been in country a short time, they assigned me to a tank that had a lance corporal as the tank commander. And I was the tank, and he hadn't been in country that long either, but he'd been in Hue enough times. So it was the fifth day of the battle. And so we spent most of the time either in the rear or on our way to pick up medevacs. We spent a lot of time medevacing the grunts because they couldn't carry their own, and so the tanks would go back and forth. And because we were armored, the North Vietnamese didn't bother us. But what happened is the Marines would go up a block and they'd hit some resistance, and they'd call the tanks in, and we'd shoot, and knock holes in the walls and make the guys go away. And then the Marines go to the next, go to the next. And that was the only disconcerting thing that, besides the fact of seeing very badly wounded American young men, and lots of North Vietnamese dead. Another disconcerting thing as a Marine was that over the radios, at one point, the commander, he was a full bird colonel, the Marine commander of all the infantry. In fact, he was the commander of everything, the whole battle, got on the radio and said, "Get those bleeping noisy RPG magnets away from my men." He wanted the tanks away because the RPGs were coming in and the grunts were on the outside and they were getting splattered. But we spent so much time supporting and medevacing that, I mean, it is what it is, in the heat of battle and all that kind of stuff. But the South Side, we were on the South Side. In the South Side, we were there until the 14th of February. So I was there 10 days. The tank outfit was there for 14 days, and none of the original crews that came up, none of them were still there. Every one of them were wounded and medevac, or one was killed. But so it was pretty intense. And a lot of, RPGs would penetrate and not go all the way through, and a little bit of the inside of the tank would splatter and cut a guy up, and so they'd have to medevac him. And yeah. And
how many tanks did we lose during the battle?
As far as I know, one. Might have been one on the north side, but one on the south side. And to be perfectly frank, and I guess we can publicate it because it's the statute of limitations. But just the day before I got there was a gun tank and a flamethrower tank, and they were at the Way City arena, the soccer arena, and they were fighting, and things calmed down. And the tank commander and one of the crew members decided to go into some shops and see if they could find some booze or whatever. So they were kind of looting, but they were out of the tank. And some North Vietnamese came in and had a 57 millimeter recoilless rifle and shot 3 shots into the tank and blew the tank up. And the tank commander should have been there. And I think he ended up getting in trouble, a year later or something like that. They found an investigation for it. But And also the guy that was the tank commander of the tank that I ended up being on, he got shot in the shoulder, and he tells the story later. Charlie West, great guy. He got shot in the shoulder, and he came over the intercom and said, "Ouch, I think I got shot." And he took his finger and put it in the hole and held it there until he got medevaced, and he kept from, whatever. And by the way, we're going to be in at Fort Benning next September for just 3 days, and we're going to go see. There's a huge armor museum. It's beginning of an armor museum, and they have like 100 refurbished tanks there, and we're going to go visit that. And Charlie will be there if you wanted to. You're more than welcome to come up, and and if you wanted to be every day, fine. And if not, whatever. But you're more than welcome. And Charlie talks a lot. He's from Alabama, and he was a sheriff for many, many years and stuff. But anyway, he would be fun. All right, so
he got shot. Calls it in. What happened after
that? The tank got put away, and that's when they called me. That was the next day they called me in to replace him. But even though I didn't replace him, I replaced the gunner and the lance corporal. And by the way, the last day that we were there, the 15th of February, as we were pulling out, the other tank outfit that went to the north side, First Tanks, Alpha First Tanks, was a reinforced platoon of tanks. So it's like a regular platoon. There's 5 tanks and a flame tank, and I think it was like 9 tanks that went up there, and they were landing on the other side. So we yay! And the tank commander, the young lance corporal, he was backing the tank onto the boat to take us out to go up to Dong Ha, and a mortar round came in and knocked him out. So I ended up being the tank commander for, whatever the time was. And then I ended up being tank commander later. But anyway, so we ended up going out on, they're called mite boats. And that's either one tank, or they also had LCTs, landing craft tank, that took 2 tanks. And so the 3 tanks, one was on an LST and one was ours was on a mite boat, a landing craft mechanical, I think they call it. And we went down the Perfume River and back up the Quaviette River, and ended up, and we got to the tank ramp where the maintenance is. And each tank they're kind of like Swiss cheese. With the RPGs holes and stuff. And it was pretty, all the mechanics and the bakers and they all came out, whoa, look at this one. And honestly, I'd only been in country for 15 days, but it was no big deal because I ate the elephant's ears. You know what I mean? So anyway, they put big bolts in the holes and welded the bolts, and they said, okay, you're ready to go. So, and then from there, the tank section that I was in, it was the 3rd tank section, 3rd flamethrower. It was M67A2 flamethrower tank. And there are 3 of them. And there are 3 sections, so there's 9 in the tank battalion. And Alpha Company gets Foxtrot 123, Bravo Company gets Foxtrot 212223, and Charlie Company gets 312323. And in the past, the Charlie Company commander didn't want to have flame tanks. It was too much worry or whatever. So we ended up being part of Headquarters and Service Company, H&S Company. And in Way City, that's where we were at H&S Company. And when we got to Dong Ha, where Alpha Company was, the Alpha Company commander says, I'll take them. So we ended up, for about 6 months, we were part of Alpha Company. So they had 6 flame tanks in their company, and Charlie didn't. And then pretty much halfway through my deployment, Charlie Company got a new tank commander. He says, I want those tanks. So we ended up going to Charlie Company. But after Way City, it was pretty calm. And it was kind of interesting. They call it baptism by fire. And that kind of was what it was like. And most of the time, and again, I was a corporal, but most of the time, people would say, eyes light up and say, you were in Way City? No. Because there weren't a lot of tanks in Way City, and especially in 3rd tanks, it ended up only 3, but it was 4 tanks in Way City. So it was Badge of honor. And you know that already just from talking to, the 5th Marines and the 1st Marines and all that. But
yeah, they remember the medevac trucks, but none of them remember any tanks or anything.
Absolutely. You had tanks, and that's kind of the way the Marine tanks were anyway. And the only time that the grunts really appreciated us, and it is what it is, and that's the Marine doctrine to have tanks. It used to be the Marine doctrine to have tanks, and so unless they really, really hit the poop and they are ready. In fact, I don't know if Chamberlain talked about that, where he said that the tanks saved their men on an operation. And that's when we came in and kicked ass and took names and burned the hell out of the bad guys and whatever. That's when they remembered we were good. The rest of the time, we'd break down and they'd have to leave a squad to take care of us. We'd hit a mine. It'd take us, a day to repair the mine damage. So it was always kind of a pain. And the other one I thought was just kind of interesting was I had several reunions with guys from 2-9, and I in the Philadelphia area, I got a really good buddy, and I'll tell you the story in a second. But I went with him to a bunch of different 2-9 reunions, and the guys would say that the tanks they made too much noise and chased the bad guys away, so they couldn't fight them. And I said, you should have been lucky that the bad guys ran away, so you didn't get shot at. Said, oh, I would be John Wayne, But so I'm at a Marine Corps birthday in Philadelphia, 1992, and one of my buddies that was there and said it's a big thing, it's Cookie's Tavern, and it's been publicized and stuff. It's a big thing, and tons of Marines go, and they close off a huge street. It's a busy street, and they close it completely off, and of course all the drivers are all angry and stuff, but it's 3 blocks, yada, yada, yada. And we were there and drinking some beers and what, and the guy said, hey, we ought to go up and see Tommy. And I have no Tommy. And it turned out it was Tommy Fennerty, who's been a member of us, the Vietnam Tank. He's a grunt, but he's a member of our Vietnam Tanker Association. And he's been 15 years, and he writes really good stories, grunt perspective stories, sometimes about tanks. But I went to his house, and I didn't know him. And there were a couple other Marines there, and we were drinking some beers and stuff. And he had a photo album on his, and I started flipping through the photo album, and there was my tank. I said, where did you get that picture? He said, oh, Operation Thor, don't you remember? He said, we had to be your security for your tank. And I said, you were next to my tank. I'm getting goosebumps. You were next to my tank? And I said, yeah. And he said, don't you remember you went out and had you burn some stuff? And I said, yeah. And he said, yeah, well, we were there and I was taking your picture. I was taking the pictures. The problem with this whole thing was we were out in the middle of the DMZ, and I shot the flame into, it was a big bunker complex, and the Marines ran out of C4, so they couldn't blow it up. So I used my flamethrower and I burned it down and made a whole bunch of smoke, and the North Vietnamese started shooting their artillery at us, because they knew they were Marines and they didn't want the bad guys. So there were several people that got wounded. In fact, early on, this was in, Operation Thor was in July, and it was really, really, really hot. And Marines were falling like flies. And as they got heat stroke or heat prostration, we threw them on the back of the tank and took them up to the helipad. And after this incoming situation, they threw a guy on the tank, and he was a guy that was from Castle Rock, Colorado, which is just up the road. And he and I got a little bit to know each other when he had heat prostration. And here he is back on my tank, and he got wounded. He couldn't dig a hole. He was too screwed up, and they shouldn't have let him back in the field, because he'd only been gone for like 2 days. But he was too tired and too exhausted to dig a hole, and he didn't. And artillery got him. So yeah. And here's another one. We're on the same operation, and we hit some shit. We hit some resistance, and on this big, huge sweep operation, and it really was probably a rear element. The North Vietnamese were running away from us, but they left a rear element there, and they had mortars and RPGs and all that kind of stuff. And so we were going along kind of on line, and the firing came there. So we turned this way, and of course the grunts all got down, and I couldn't move my tank forward because the grunts were there. I didn't want to run over them, but I wanted to get into the battle. And so I'm screaming, get out of the way, get out of the way. And they rolled out of the way. And just as the tank pulled forward, I felt this warmth on my face. And I had my head, like this much of my head out of the turret, because you're in a flame tank and there's not a lot of vision blocks and things. So I felt this, and it went like this, and it was like a hot blast of wind on my face. And fast forward to the next evening, one of the grunt sergeants came up and said, "Did you see that RPG?" And I went, "Huh?" And they said, "It missed the top of your head by this much." Well, if we hadn't moved forward right at that minute, it would have hit me right in the face, or it would have hit in the front of and I'd been killed. But it missed. He said it missed it by about 1.5 inches. Right, just like, and that was what the exhaust of the RPG on my face. But I didn't notice that at the time. So we went in and engaged the enemy and several tanks, and all of a sudden somebody said, "Where's Bonita?" And Chewy Bonita, Jesus Bonita's tank was over on this side, and it just disappeared. And as it turned out, his driver didn't see a big B-52 bomb crater that a tank can fit in, and this tank fit in, and it slid down, and the outside track flipped off, and the inside track flipped in, so they couldn't do anything. They couldn't move. And Bonilla left his helmet on and jumped out of the tank, and when I got there, he wasn't around. And I said, "Where's Chewy?" He was inside the turret saying Hail Marys, because when he jumped out, an artillery round came in and hit a tree, and a big piece of shrapnel bounced off another tree and hit him flat in the face like this and knocked him on his butt. And he went, "Whoa!" And he got in the tank and was doing Hail Marys and Pater Nosters and all that kind of stuff. And we got the tank fixed. It took a little bit, but that was a pretty interesting experience to do, and get him out of the thing, and then have to button up the track and all that. And of course, the grunts were all upset with us because they had to keep on the offensive, and 3 tanks were stopped there trying to get him all fixed up and all that kind of stuff. But okay, and that was around Cantillon. It was a big operation in July of '68, and pretty much the rest of my tour, we spent doing 2 things. One was called Task Force Robbie, and that was an armored unit of tanks and Ontos and Army quad 50s, quad 50, 450 caliber machine guns on the back of a truck, and also Sky Dusters, the 40 millimeter cannons. They would all assemble in one location, and because the Marines were so spread out around the DMZ, they didn't have enough tanks to go around. So this was a rapid reaction force that some colonel made up, that if something happened over here, we would all mount up and charge out that way and then charge out this way. And most of the time we went to practice runs. And the one time that we really had a huge battle, there's a in the history books, there's the Battle of Dai Do, which also turned into the Battle of Dong Ha. And that was in, I think May or June. And this is before Cantillon, but May or June. And so we lined up, and the commander, Robichaud, commander, and the Task Force Robbie was Robichaud's thing, Robbie. And he said, "Line up and cross country." We should have stayed on the road, because as soon as we went cross country, the North Vietnamese knew that we were there. They knew that if they had an attack, which they had, and we were going to relieve those guys, they knew that we were coming, so they put out anti-tank mines. And so my tank and about 4 other tanks all hit mines. And so there were 4 or 5 more tanks that were able to keep going, and ho. And my tank got hauled back to Dong Ha to get repaired, which took about 2 days to fix all the damage. And for those 2 days and 1 day more, you could hear the firing. And it was, it was maybe 10 miles away. And you could hear the firing of the Battle of Dai Do. It didn't stop for 36 hours. It was constant battle. And if anybody wants to do any research on the Battle of Dai Do, it was I think it might have been 2 Marine companies against a regiment of North Vietnamese, and they won. And it was no tanks got to that point, and a few Amtraks, but that was it. And it was almost all guns against guns, M16s against AK-47s. And there were Medal of Honors were on there and all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of a regret, but it's a regret that we couldn't have gotten there and reinforced the grunts. and it was the 4th Marines, I think they call the Magnificent Bastards. So
that was May and
I backflipped. It should have been July, May, but yeah.
So that was Contienne, and you said the rest of your tour was Task Force Robbie. That was actually earlier than the July. Okay, so,
I flip flopped July and May. Okay, so after the July trip. That's when Charlie Company's commander came and called us back. So we went back to where Charlie Company was at Camlo Hill, and we were there for maybe 2 weeks. And I got to go on R&R, and I went to R&R in Hawaii, and my fiance at the time met me there, and we had a terrific time. And you blink an eye, and I was back in Vietnam. And when I got back from R&R, I went to Alpha Company. Dong Ha, where the tank ramp is and all that, getting ready to go to Cam Lo Hill to go to Charlie Company. And Charlie Company was all there at Dong Ha. I said, where the hell are you going? I said, oh, we're going up to the north side where that battle had been. They're going up there to be a blocking force so no more North Vietnamese can sneak down and attack Dong Ha. So we did that. We went to Mai Si Tai and Dong Ha Dai Do. And we were there. We had no grunts. We just had tanks, and so half the tanks, the crews came off and became grunts, and we were there, and that was August. And September, the gunnery sergeant said, take your tank and go up to Charlie 4. And I think there were 2 other tanks that went with us. And we got on the Mike boats and went down to Qua Viet, where the staging was, and then we were going to get on the beach on the other side and go up the beach and go up. It's near the DMZ on that side, right on the oceans. And Typhoon blew in. And it was Typhoon Bess was the name of it. And luckily we weren't back in Mai Si Tai. It flooded. It completely flooded. They ended up having to move to another location. But it's just, the river just rose and whatever. But my one story about that is we were in a tent waiting to get across the river and let the typhoon go through. And the tent, it was a mess hall tent, and they had all the rations and stuff. So we ate pretty good. But after about 2 days of this, I said, bullshit. So we went out, I flagged down a Navy boat. The 3 tanks got on a boat. We went across the river. We went up, and the typhoon's still going on. And the waves were coming over the top of my head. We had to drive in the, what do they call that? The tidal zone where the waves are, because they plant mines in the sand. So we were in, the waves, the normal waves would break here and we would be here. And the waves, they were so big, they were coming over the top of the tank, and the water came up over my driver's shoulders and into the turret. And my gunner had to lift his feet up, but it was amazing. And of course the radios went out, and we got up to where we were going, and things calmed down. But it was. I can only imagine how easily stuck you could get. Oh yeah. And the good thing is that the bad guys were also, because it was typhoon. And so we turned our guns toward the shore and just went up the beach. But it was pretty crazy. And not much later, we were out on the beach, and I looked out on the horizon. And here's this huge ship. And what is that? That's the New Jersey. They had just came on station, the USS New Jersey battleship, and they had just come on station. And it was parallel to us. And they turned this way and then fired the guns. And the gun's blast was as wide as the entire boat. I went, whoa. And later we were on an operation and called in the New Jersey, and supposedly the 3 rounds of one gun salvo will obliterate an entire grid square. So it was amazing, and get some Navy, that kind of thing. But and from there we went down, and it was interesting. And I read about this much later. We went down to Quang Tri, and Quang Tri was the division headquarters. It was way out of the way of the bad guys' guns, and it was far enough south, and it was also enough inland that nothing could happen from the ocean, and it was also far enough away from the mountains that the bad guys. So it was almost like being in these states. Okay, almost. And they had hot beer, a cold beer, hot showers, and a hardback hooches for us to live in. And I've been living on the back of the tank from the whole time, we call it a rubber whore, but it was a air mattress, and eating sea rations a lot. And so it's almost like going on R&R again. And I've read much later that this 3rd Marine Division was getting ready for Nixon's Vietnamization of the war and starting to pull the Marine Corps out. Okay. Well, I was there until February, but the 9th Marines, which were the first Marines to land back in March of 65, the 2-9 and 1-9 were the first to land. They were the first to leave. And Charlie Company was with the 9th Marines. So Charlie Company went back. All the guys that I'd been with went back to Okinawa in October. So it was 4 or 5 months later, and then everybody started going back after that. They started pulling people out. And one other thing in Quang Tri, this R&R center, they wanted to keep the MSR, the main supply route between Quang Tri and Dong Ha. And Dong Ha was a combat base. Quang Tri was the rear. And Quang Tri also had quite a few boat boat docks. And they would bring the boats in and unload them there and then load them up on trucks. And they go to Dong Ha and Quang Tri and, Dong Ha and Camp Carroll and all that. But that was the point where the shipping point, if you will. And they wanted to keep that road open because people mine it and all that at night. So we would eat chow at night and, 6. And so at 6:30 or 7 o'clock, a gun tank and my flame tank, we would zoom down the road. And I think it was 6 or 8 miles. We'd zoom down the road to Dong Ha, turn around, zoom back, and then we'd sit there for 2 hours, and then zoom down, and then sit there for 2 hours, and then zoom back. So it was a erratic, and we call it a rat patrol, and because it was at night, and we ran without lights, and because no one was supposed to be driving on the road, it was fairly open. Once in a great while, a supply truck or a couple of supply trucks would go, a necessary, whatever. But most of the time it was open, so the road was ours. But we'd zoom back and forth, and never a mine, never a problem. Only one time the gun tank was in front of us and we were going at full speed, which was 30 plus miles an hour. And all of a sudden the gun tank's track went out, and we had to repair that. So the trucks, we had to stop the trucks and, and get everything going. And what the hell are you guys doing there? And then one other time we were at the Quang Tri, and I got a call on the radio, and they said that one of our CAP units, our Civil Action Combined Action Program, there was a unit, and it happened to be made up of some tankers that didn't have a tank to be on, and they were part of that CAP unit, and they saw something on the wire. So the first sergeant who was running everything, and he was actually a grunt, he said, do you know what on the coordinates? I said, I got my map in my hand, top. And he said, do you know where it is? I said, I see it on the map. I said, we'll be right there. So we zoomed over. And of course, whatever it was, it might have been dogs, but whatever it was in the wire, they went away. We charged away, but we thought we were going to have some little action, in the whatever, but yeah. And then we're getting close.
We got 15 minutes.
15? Yeah. Oh, goodness. Talking fast. All right. So, we did one more rat patrol, and we did 2 months of rat patrols, and we weren't every single night. My tank went. So once in a while it didn't. And one other time there was an alert, and all our tanks were on this big long line, and we had the cooches right here. And there was a call, and one of the tank battalion patrols, cooks and bakers and whatever, they went out on a patrol, and a sniper, and this is kind of like R&R, okay? So a sniper started shooting at him, and shooting at the perimeter that went like this kind of, and they started shooting, and bang, and wait 5 minutes, and bang, bang, and the the infantry, if you will, fell down and got out of the way. And one of the Army pogues had a machine gun, and he just started shooting randomly. And he ended up killing 2 of the Marines. He shot the Marines. He didn't know what he was doing. And, oh my God, we're going to, and probably, I'm saying the sniper probably shot 10 rounds. Okay. So it wasn't like a battle or anything. It was one guy. And that was pretty sad and unfortunate, but, stuff happens in war. And so we finished the last rat patrol. And as I'm pulling in that morning, Corporal Handler sticks his head out and says, "Hey, where? We got your orders." So I jumped off the tank and ran into the hooch and got my Willie Peter bag and my sea bag and said, "See you guys," and got on a truck and went down. And after I got on the truck and I was on my way to the flight line to catch a thing down to Dong Ha, I said, I shouldn't be leaving. I was a section leader. I had 9 guys and 3 tanks and whatever. I said, I shouldn't be leaving. And I didn't do it. I only thought about jumping off the truck and going back. I only thought about it. I didn't think about it. And honestly, I don't have any, there's guys that have a lot of regrets about leaving their buddies or finding out after they leave that somebody was killed or badly wounded or whatever. And I can say that none of my guys, while I was the section leader, nobody got hurt. Somebody might smash their hand on a hammer or something, but nobody got shot. Nobody got RPG'd. Nobody, it was a good time. Absolutely. And so no guilt other than leaving my guys, but I'm going home. So, and I get down to Dong Ha, and so we'll talk a little bit about that because that was an adventure. I got down to Dong Ha, got on an airplane, flew to Da Nang, and in Da Nang they have a barracks for guys coming in, and they have a barracks for guys leaving. And in the barracks you're leaving, you had to take everything you owned and dump it on the floor and open it up, and they needed to check it. And I had a I guess they call it a tactical map, but it wasn't that tactical. It had mostly was Vietnamese, but I had the map and they said that's contraband and they took it away from me because I want to take it home and you can get them online. Okay. And I also had a North Vietnamese pet helmet with a NVA star and stuff. They took that away from me because it was contraband. I had a little, it would look like a canteen, but it was a 2-spout North Vietnamese rifle cleaning kit, like a solvent and oil or whatever. And they took that away from me because that was contraband. Right. And they were taking all kinds of, and of course some guys had rifles and pistols and what, but I just thought that was so innocuous and they took it away from me anyway. But I tell you what, they took it down to the Air Force and sold it to them. I guarantee you. A pith helmet? Come on. And anyway, just, it is what it is. But we went and I got to Okinawa. And I was in for 3 years. I should tell that story. I'll tell you a story of that. So we were in Okinawa, and therefore we were only going to be there for 3 days and process out and whatever. And I had 6 months and 2 weeks left on my tour of my enlistment, and I also had already been accepted to go back to college. So I was going to get an early out. So normally I would have gotten out the 1st of September, but instead I was going to get out the 1st of June to go back to college and go to summer school. And so technically I only had 3 months, but on paper I had 6 months and 2 weeks. And they were letting us out at 6 months automatically. As soon as you land, if you have less than 6 months, you're out of the Marine Corps. Okay. And they were getting geared up to reduce the quantity of Marines and all that kind of stuff. The war was getting over and all that. Anyway, I went in Okinawa and I had 2 weeks. So I went to the troop handler of the returning guys. And I said, I think he was a sergeant. I said, hey, keep me here for 2 weeks. Make an excuse and keep me here for 2 weeks. When I get back, I'll have less than 6 months. He said, no, they'll throw me in jail. I can't do it. I said, okay. So I went back to the office pogues, the clerks, and I said, look, stamp my orders due to separate. And he goes, they'll throw me in jail. I said, $100? He said, okay. So he stamped them. And it cost, and back then, $100 was, I think I think a corporal might have been making $200 a month. Okay, so that was half my month. So it was 2 weeks' pay to get this centrifuge. We take off next day. We take off, going along, come down. We're going to land in El Toro Marine Air Base. And because it was raining cats and dogs, it wasn't safe. So we landed in LA. Okay, landed in LA, jumped off the plane. I kissed the ground. And I was one of the few that did. But I kissed the ground and was getting ready to go into the terminal. And they said, no, get on the buses and go. Well, they didn't want us to go in and have all the anti-war press testers and stuff. So, and I had no idea that was going on. I was a corporal. You know. So anyway, I got in the bus and we went to the El Toro, and the guy took my orders and he went, "You're going to Camp Pendleton." So my $100 it was toilet paper. Anyway, so I ended up going on leave, and I came back and I got in there, and my platoon sergeant was a staff sergeant that was on his way to OCS. So he was really gung-ho. And I fell out for the first time, and my utilities, the uniform BDUs, my utilities were wrinkled and weren't starched. And my boots, I don't think had been shined since I had left for Vietnam. And I had a mustache. And he came up to me right like this, and he says, "Corporal Ware, don't you know that E5s and above, sergeants and above, get mustaches? Go inside the barracks, put on a proper uniform, and shave that off." So I went in, I shaved it off, and my roommate, who hadn't been to Vietnam, had starch utilities. And he was about the same size. So I put on his utilities and went up to the tank ramp and yada, yada, yada. And 2 hours later, "Hey, Ware, first sergeant wants you." So I went down. "Yeah, Top, what do you need?" He said, "Sergeant Major wants to see you. Get on your Class A's." So I put on my green Class A's and I went up. "What do you need, Sergeant Major?" He says, "Old man wants to see you. Knock on his door." So I knock on his door. "Come in." "Corporal Ware reporting, sir." He says, "Congratulations, Sergeant Ware." And they made me a sergeant 3 hours after I'd shaved off my mustache that I'd had for 12 months and 29 days. And that isn't exactly the point, but it's close to the point, besides the fact that I just got back from Vietnam and I wasn't happy, Pew, pew. So that was at the point I said, "You know what? I'm out of here."
You're out $100 and a mustache.
Absolutely. So anyway, and so I hung out there. Now, this staff sergeant that was on his way to OCS, he didn't like me. And I was the flamethrower tank section leader at 5th Tanks for whatever the numbers were, 21212. And he would make us, Friday morning, he'd make us take our 3 tanks and go out and support the grunts and, for training and all that. And of course, technically, they're done around 3 or 4 o'clock. All right. Then we come back down to the tank ramp and we have to clean off the tanks, and everything has to be parade ground ready. So we had to clean off the tanks, and it was 7 o'clock before we were done. Well, so I'm not going to do that. So I had corporals and whatever. So I'd have a buddy of mine from the motor pool come out to the field, pick me up. I'd go out on liberty. They'd come back, clean up the tanks. He found out about it. And I said, and this is a very common pat thing when someone says, "You're in trouble." I said, "What are you going to do? Cut off my hair and send me to Vietnam? I'm getting out of here in 30 days, whatever." So that calmed that down. He left me alone after that. But yeah. And the only comment, I've probably got 50 more, but the only comment, how are we doing?
Good.
Okay. The only comment, a really unfortunate situation in the Marine Corps and in all of the military, actually in all of the United States. And the Marine Corps is a tiny microcosm of what's going on in the country. If there's drugs, there's people that do drugs. If there's, racial unrest, there's racial unrest. And in 69, 70, 71, young Black Marines, which we call dark green Marines, there's only one Marine, one color, and it's green. And I firmly believe in that, and I still do. But the blacks at the time, and I don't know where the name came. We were called Chucks. White guys were called Chucks, and I think that came from Mr. Charles, which back in the day, Mr. Charles was the owner of the slaves. And because Charlie, Viet Cong, Mr. Charles, so they changed it to Chuck. So we were Chucks. And the blacks called themselves splibs. And I think they thought that was an African term that meant superior. But it was fine. And it was an accepted word. Those two words were very much accepted. Chucks and splib dudes. That was just accepted. But the splib dudes were disgruntled and, felt oppressed and whatever, which in the Marine Corps they're not, but they felt that way. And so there were times where, a young white kid that had too much beer walk in the barracks, and there'd be 3 black guys and they'd beat him up and steal his wallet. And that happened. And I think a lot of, Arkansas dudes, might have a issue with a couple little black guys and, whatever, but it was not a very pleasant time. And it was a really good time for me to get out of the Marine Corps, at that time. And, I got out and I went almost 30 years without really seriously giving Vietnam a thought or giving the Marine Corps a thought. I had a wife, I had kids, I had a job, and that was enough. And it was it was actually 1998. I got my own computer. I had company computers all the time, but I had my own computer. My wife gave it to me for my birthday, and I went online and I did Vietnam tanks and a mention of someone who had posted something about Vietnam, an attempted Vietnam reunion of tankers. And I called the guy. He was in Massachusetts, Dick Carey, and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm doing this, da da da." And so we became really good friends. And of course, I do things 100% or I don't do them. And so I got really involved with him and planning and all that. And we ended up in the July 4th weekend of 1999, we ended up, 79 of us ended up in Washington, D.C. And 3 of my gunner, my best friend in the Marines, and another guy, Gary Hall, that I know, they came. And so that in itself was phenomenal. But the other part of that was, and I'm getting goosebumps talking about it, that I also found out that I had a whole boatload of brothers that talked the same language, that grew up the same way I did. I could say weird words and I didn't need to explain myself to them. It was, the sky opened up. It really did. The sky opened up and God stuck down and waved at me and said, "Okay, you're okay." And at that reunion, which it's probably one of, besides getting cataract surgery and having kids, that was one of the best days of my life. Okay. Or the 3 days. And during that time, and this is now as my VA pitch. Okay. I've talked to 200, 300 guys about the VA and benefits and what to do and all that. And I've probably helped get 75, 80 guys 100%, anyway, I'm doing all this stuff. And somebody comes up to me and says, "Where? You're fucked up." And I went, "Huh?" And he said, "You need to go to the VA and talk to them." He says, you need to get rated." I went, "Huh?" Now, when I think about it, I had 11 jobs as an adult. One of those I left on my own volition. Okay? And attitude. And so I went to the VA, got 70%, kept working. 10, 15 years later, decided to quit and went back and I got 100%. And it's cumbersome, but it's not difficult. It's disconcerting. It's definitely not easy, but it was, if you've been shot at and you've shot back and you've seen people get killed, especially young, strong, burly people, and especially a friend, that's going to affect you. And I read some books about, and this is almost like a lecture now, but I've read some books on PTSD. And when you're 19, 20, 21, your brain doesn't fully develop until you're 25 years old. Okay. And when you have a situation where flight or fight, 9 times out of 10, people are going to run. Okay. Once in a while, somebody will stand and fight, but almost always you run and hide. Okay. Well, your body is used to that, and your body's chemicals. That's how you run like hell, because the body chemicals, your adrenaline or whatever is making you do that. Well, if you're in a battle situation and you got Marines on both sides and tanks and all that, you can't run. You want to, but you can't. And your brain's saying, do it, do it. Well, the chemicals that are in they're going on your brain. They're actually causing brain damage, and it's not repairable. And guys say, oh, well, I'll be better. I said, no. You can't take medicine for this. You can have some therapy to cope. And the shrink said, why did you wait 35 years to come to see us? And I said, I finally got tired of fighting. And the cop said, or the shrink said, I understand. And what you got to do is you got to learn how to cope with it. And when you feel, I had a psychologist say, look, every hour, write down how you're feeling on a journal. And when the phone rings, because that used to really upset me, because it startled me and whatever. And I was a buyer in a department store, so the phone rang all the time. But she said, write down how you're feeling about that phone call, because most of the time it's a problem, and it's my fault. It's just like being the president of the Vietnam Tankers Association. Oh my God, where are the bathrooms? Whatever. Anyway, and coping. And I learned that it was the phone that really, really upset me. And so I had to say, 1, 2, 3, and then pick up the phone but coping. And that was a big thing. But really, really what made me really upset when I got back from Vietnam and people found out I was a Marine, where people said, you're a Vietnam Marine guy? I said, you're going to kill anybody today? Or how many people did you kill? And anyway.
Well, sadly, we are all out of time. We'll have to pick this up next year.
Okay.
Next time I'm in your neighborhood.
Okay.
I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to share all those stories with me. It's really an honor and a pleasure.
Is that too much? Is that too much?
My line of work? No. But most importantly, thank you for your service, John.
Absolutely. Thank you.